Hi, my name's John Black. This morning I'm going to be chatting with Jerry McGowan. Jerry's a longtime Tampa resident and a former locomotive machinist for the Atlantic Coast Line and the Seaboard Airline Railroad.
Hello, my name is Jerald McGowan, and I started out working with the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad when I was 18 years old. And I started out as an apprentice machinist. And you know, they don't have apprentice machinist jobs anymore. But back then they did. And it was a 4-year apprenticeship. And I got laid off a few times while I was in my apprenticeship, so it took me a lot longer than 4 years to finish it up, you know. But anyway, I finally got to be a journeyman machinist, and I got laid off. As soon as I got my journeyman machinist done, they didn't have a job. So I went up to Waycross, Georgia to claim a job up there, and I worked there 3 years, from 1951 to 1954. And then they called me back to Tampa, and I came back to Tampa. And moved my family back to Tampa, and when we got back to Tampa, well, I found out I was working on a temporary vacancy. They tricked me. So I was working a temporary vacancy. In about 4 months, the fella come back to work, and I got laid off again. So then I hired on the Seaboard Airline Railroad. I never lost a day's pay. The Lord was watching out for me for sure. So I left my job one day. Next day I went to work. That night the man called me up from the Seaboard, asked me if I could come to work the next morning. I said, I'll be there in the morning. And so I worked there 10 years. Then I quit the railroad and I went to work for Reynolds Metals Company. When I got my Social Security time in, I went back to the railroad and I finished out in 1990. So that's my story about my railroad. I had like 42 years and 4 months, something like that. I haven't figured it out lately. But anyway, I had quite a few years with the railroad, yeah.
Okay. And you started here in Tampa though, right?
I started here in Tampa, yeah. And I worked in Tampa, I worked at shops in St. Petersburg, I worked in Waycross, Georgia.
Okay. How long have you been in the Tampa area?
I've been here since I was 1 year old.
Okay.
All my life, yeah, except when I was in the Navy.
Yeah, pretty much.
When I was in the service, I was gone, but
okay.
Yeah.
So, what made you decide to start to get into railroading?
Well, the money for one thing. When I come back from the Navy, I got a job on a dredge boat, making minimum wage, 35 cents an hour. And so that was a graveyard job. And so I was going to school at night, trying to finish up my high school diploma, which I didn't get before I went in the Navy. And so when I got that done, I hired on at the Tampa Shipbuilding. And they wasn't paying real good either, so I found out that the railroad shop was paying better, so I put in for a job there. And my father worked for the railroad too. Well, I first put in for a job at the Seaboard Airline Railroad. And the master mechanic said, bring me your high school diploma and I'll put you to work. I said, well, I can't do that. So I went and hired on at the Atlantic Coast Line, and they asked me if I had a high school diploma, and I said, yeah. But I didn't. But that's why I had to go to night school to get it. So anyway, they hired me as an apprentice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything in particular that you liked or disliked about working for the railroad?
What I liked about the railroad job was that it was something different. I didn't know what I was going to do when I went to work in the morning. Every day was different. When I got to the work, I punched in. I didn't know what's coming that day. It was kind of a mystery all day long, you know, what's coming next. But that's the part I liked about it. It wasn't the same repetitious work over and over and over again. And sometimes it was, you know, in my apprenticeship I had to do the same job maybe 2 or 3 months, like running a wheel lathe or something like that. But then I got switch off to another part of the job where I had to do some other kind of work, you know. So in an apprenticeship program, I worked like 6 months in a machine shop, 6 months in a welding bench, 6 months in a link bench, 6 months in a piston job, 6 months in a erecting shop, and all these different shops, you know. And so to get a overall experience on back in the steam locomotive days, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was basically how you got trained.
Yeah, that's how I got trained, by working these different jobs. And of course I was assigned to a machinist, but a lot of times machinists, I'd be doing the job, he'd be off somewhere else doing his job. Like if I was running a wheel lathe, he would show me how to run it, and I get started doing the job, and he'd say I could do it, then he'd go off and do another job.
Okay.
And so like I run a wheel lathe like 4 months, you know, and back then we only turned like 4 pairs of wheels a day. Today, with modern machinery, they turn 16, 18 pairs a day or more. But back then, you did really good to turn 4 pair of wheels a day. You know, we had to cut the wheel, then we had to put the forming tool on it and form the flange and form the tread of the wheel. And a lot of people didn't know, but there was different treads for different wheels. The steam locomotives had one tread, the passenger coaches had a different tread, and they had what they call a streamline tread. So we had to know what tread went on which wheel, so which forming tool to use. Okay. Yeah. So the passenger coach wheels, instead of being tapered, they were straight for a little ways and then they tapered. But the other wheels was tapered so that the centrifugal force, as they went around a curve, the centrifugal force, I can't say the word, centrifugal force would, the weight would move over, and that would put this wheel over here on the high side and this wheel over here on the low side. So they wouldn't have that popping noise as they went around the curve.
What about dislikes? Anything you particularly disliked about working for the railroad?
Let me think. What I disliked? Well, some things I disliked was like having to work midnight shifts. Sometimes having to work too many hours and not knowing when I'm going to get to come home. Like I have worked 24 hours at a time before, back when it was hard up for power. Didn't have enough locomotives to run the trains ahead. And we'd be working like 24 hours or 8 hours off and another 24 hours. That part I didn't like too much. It wore me out. But I didn't have to do that very long. They finally got enough power so they could do the job they had to do. Okay. But back when they started out with the diesels, they didn't have near enough power to pull the trains. And they got rid of the steam engines too quick because they was getting more money. I heard they was getting more money for scrap iron than what they paid for the locomotives originally. So that's the reason they got rid of them so fast. When the scrap iron price was up, they was getting rid of them quick as they could. And so if, you know, dollar and cent wise, but not with the inflation of course, but dollar and cent wise, they got more money for the scrap iron than what they paid for the locomotive originally. So they got rid of the steam engines. You know, it didn't take them but a year to get rid of all the steam engines. And when I was working at Waycross, we had one line that went from Waycross to Brunswick, Georgia, that we had to run steam engines on. So we had to maintain 10 steam locomotives to run that one route. And I understand the reason I had it was because of the trussels. They had to rebuild the trussels. The trussels wasn't strong enough for the diesels. The heavy diesels is heavier than the small locomotives they were using. Okay. That's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to talk too much because I want you on here and not me. So that's why I'm nodding more than anything else.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Any particular events or accomplishments that you particularly enjoyed?
Well, let me think. Accomplishments. Well, I accomplished some things, and I got pats on the back for, you know. No money, but I got pats on the back. Hey, you did a good job, Mac. Thank you. And so, you know, sometimes I was a pretty good troubleshooter. And they'd have a problem, you know, and I'd come in off my days off and find out they'd been working on it for 2 days, and I figure it out and I get the problem solved in 3 or 4 hours, and then I get a pat on the back, you know, what they call an attaboy. No money, just an attaboy.
Yeah. All right, once you achieved your apprenticeship and you started actually doing regular jobs, you know, what kind of work did you actually do? I mean, and you can start, with I know you used to work on steam engines in the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
Well, as soon as I finished my apprenticeship, I had to go to Waycross, Georgia. And the first job I had was in the shop where they remanufactured the parts. I forget the name of that shop now. They call it reconditioning shop. That was it, the reconditioning shop. Where they rebuilt the blowers, the air compressors, they rebuilt the apprentices that went to the locomotives. And part of that was honing the cylinders, working up the cylinder heads, and the air compressor valves and all that. But had different sections in there that did different things. And I started out working air compressor valves.
okay.
And I did that for about 2 days, and they put me over on the honing the pistons, honing the cylinder liners and micing the pistons and magnum fluxing the connector rods and all that stuff.
And that was still all for steam engines?
So yeah, I did that. No, I didn't do any steam engine work up there, except one time.
Okay.
What I did up there was all diesel work.
Okay.
But one time they had a steam locomotive come in there and they needed tires, and they put me and a crew on there to work on the tires, to change the tires.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know that steam locomotives had tires,
Oh, yeah.
but they did. They had steel tires, and you could take them off and put them on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But each tire had to be fitted individually to each wheel, and you had to bore the tire, the inside diameter of the tires, smaller than the outside diameter of the wheel. And the rule of thumb was 1/1000 of an inch smaller than the inch in diameter. If you had an 80-inch wheel, you had to bore a diameter inside the tire 80/1000 of an inch smaller. So when you heated it and put it on, it would shrink down on there and be tight. Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the highlights of all the changes that you saw over your entire career with the railroad? I mean, I know well, basically just the changes.
Well, there was a whole lot of changes. That changed from, of course, the major change was from steam to diesel. That was a major change. But then from the diesels, as they progressed, they got a lot of changes. We started out with everything was belt driven. The traction motor blowers, the cooling fans, all that was belt driven. And we had an awful lot of trouble with the belts, and they tried every kind of way to alleviate that trouble. So finally they come up with direct drives, with universal joints and drive shafts and all that stuff. And finally that didn't work out too good, so they come up with putting an alternator inside the main generator and using that power to operate the cooling fans and the traction motor blowers. So the changes kept progressing all along. As the diesels, they started out kind of rudimentary, and then they kept progressing and getting better and better until I don't know what they got now since I retired. I've been retired for 29 years. So, a lot of changes since I retired, but every year there was changes. And we had to kind of keep up with those changes every year. Yeah.
So those are like technology changes.
The technology kept getting better and better.
What about changes due to various mergers?
Changes due to what?
The mergers?
The mergers?
Yeah.
Well, I really don't know much about that because I quit the railroad in 1965, went to work for Reynolds Metals Company. And I worked there until 1971. And during that time I quit is when the Atlantic Coastline and the Seaboard Airline merged and become the Seaboard Coastline. So we went back to work in August of 1971 for the railroad. I went back to work for Seaboard Coastline. And of course, you know what happened after that. They had a lot of mergers and finally become CSX. And my boss man asked me one day, I said, what does CSX stand for? He said, I don't know. He said, well, I'll find out. And so I said, oh yeah, that's good. He'll find out for sure. Yeah, he'll find out. Well, I didn't think he would, but you know what? At the end of the day, he came and he said, I asked everybody in the shop, all of them, the general foreman, and they didn't know what CSX stood for. So I called Jacksonville, the headquarters. Here's what I found out. CSX stands for Chassis Seaboard System. I said, system? He said, yeah, the X stands for system. I said, why? Why does the X stand for? He said, because another railroad has CSS. So Chicago Southern or something Railroad had the letter CSS, so the chassis Seaboard system had to go to CSX, and the X stood for system.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of interesting to me because nobody seemed to know the answer. And I asked the question, and nobody in the shop knew the answer. Even the general foreman didn't know the answer. So I had to call Jacksonville to find out.
Well, I know what my daddy called CSX, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to repeat that on this camera. All right, well, so comparing ACL to Seaboard, in your mind, what was good and maybe not so good about the two, you know, in comparing the two?
Yeah, well, first off, when I went to work for a Seaboard airline, I found out there was 2 cents reduction in my wages per hour. Because on the Atlantic Coast line, you punched in on your time and punched out on your time. But on the Seaboard, you punched in on their time and punched out on their time. So for that, it was 2 cents less per hour. So we had a 5-minute period of time to punch in after the whistle blew. And that was one thing. Then the other thing was, when I worked for the Seaboard for about 2 weeks, the Atlantic Coast Line called me back to work. So I went over there and told them I wanted to sign a resignation paper. And they didn't have one. And I said, now the mechanic come out and said, what do you want to quit for? I said, because I got a job where I'm not going to be laid off every 5 minutes. He said, you're not going to be laid off? I said, no. I said, I've done been laid off. I ain't telling how many times since I've been working for this company. And I said, I hear over there that they don't lay people off like that. And so I'm staying over there. So he told his clerk, he said, type out a resignation paper, let him sign it. So I signed it and I left there, and that was the last time I went there, you know, to that office. But he didn't want me to leave. He said, I need a machinist. I said, well, I'm sorry, but, you know, y'all keep laying me off. I said, you laid me off, that's the reason I went to the Seaboard. And I said, I got over there, and I said, I kind of like it over there, and so that's where I'm going to stay. So that's where I did stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what about anything else that you can think of that was different with the coastline versus the Seaboard as far as the company's attitude, morale with the people, etc.?
Yeah, that was a lot different. When the first day I went to work for the Seaboard, the roundhouse foreman took me around and introduced me to everybody. And I never had that happen to me. Anywhere I worked on the coastline, nobody ever took me around and introduced me to the other employees. But the very first day I worked at the Seaboard, he made it a point to take me around and introduce me to the different machinists in my craft and the different foremen that was working there. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, kind of impressed me that, you know, this is a company that I might like to work for. So, and then another thing, on Atlantic Coast Line Railroad, I had to buy all my hand tools. I had to furnish my own hand tools. And so when I went to work for the Seaboard airline, I carried my hand tools to work the first day. And the machinist committeeman told me, take your tools home tonight. Seaboard furnishes your hand tools. Well, I took them home, and the next morning I went to work, and the boss assigned me a job. I said, well, I don't have no tools. He said, what'd you do with your tools? You had them yesterday. I said, yeah. I was told to take them home, and I took them home. So he told me to go down and see the roundhouse foreman. I went down and he gave me some tools, and all snap-on tools, by the way. All I had was Craftsman before. The snap-on tools are 10 times better, you know. So I got me a box of tools, and of course when I left the railroad I had to turn them all in, but that was okay. I kind of liked that part, that they furnished the hand tools. And there were some tools that they didn't have, special tools that I bought myself and used for doing different jobs, like a water pump wrench and things like that. They didn't have in their toolbox, but I had those. I bought those tools myself so I could do the jobs I needed to do. And some of the other guys did too. They also had their own tools, but by and large, the Seaboard furnished all your tools. Yeah.
Okay. Who were some of your good coworkers, bosses, and any subordinates that you work with that you can think of?
Well, I have one fellow that I worked with for about, I guess, probably 8 years. They put us together. When they got rid of the machinist helpers, they started putting machinists together because the union contract says that you will be furnished sufficient and competent help. And so originally they used helpers, machinist helpers, which got a lot less pay. But then when they did away with the helpers, they put two machinists together when our machinists needed help. A lot of times we needed help to do a job, so we put two machinists together. Well, I had this fellow that he'd just come out of his apprenticeship, and I was ahead of him, so I kind of took him under my shelter, under my wing, and brought him up. But everybody else in the shop refused to work with him because he was kind of ornery, hard to work with, and everybody else doesn't refuse to work with him. So I worked with him, and we got along. We did all right. We got along.
Okay.
But I knew his nature, and I figured him out. I knew how to handle him.
So any other particular people, foremen or coworkers or whatever that you particularly remember, or?
Yeah, I was working at Waycross, Georgia, and a foreman come to me one day and put his helper with me. Machinist helpers, back when they had the helpers, And he said, Mac, he said, I'm putting this helper with you. He said, nobody can make him work. He said, nobody's been able to get him to work. I said, well, I think I can get him to work. He said, you can? I said, yeah. So we went to work, and we had an air compressor to tear apart. And I told him to take the intercooler out and steam it off and clean it. He said, Mr. Mack, nobody does that. I said, we're going to do it. He said, no, nobody does that. I said, okay, you're fired. He said, what? I said, you're fired. Go punch the clock and go home. And he grabbed that intercooler and he put it on float and he took it out there and he started steaming it. The boss come by and he said, I never seen that guy work before like that. And I said, well, I fired him. He said, you did what? I said, I fired him. He said, you can't fire nobody. I said, I know that, but don't tell him. He don't know it. So after that, he worked. He worked for me. He didn't work for anybody else. He worked for me because he knew I was going to fire him. If he didn't work for me, I was going to fire him. And he thought I could. Kind of funny.
You ever go out on strike?
Not at the railroad.
Okay.
We had a almost strike one time. And
was it Coastline or Seaboard?
it was I think it was during one time I was working at the Seaboard. They about had a nationwide strike, but it didn't happen. But that afternoon they settled whatever it was they was fussing about. They settled it and told everybody to come back to work. And one time when I was working in Waycross, Georgia, they had run out of coal. During that coal strike in 1948, the railroad ran out of coal and they had to shut down all the locomotives. And so I seen the coal pile go from almost 2 city blocks long and 75 feet high down, and they were scraping it off the ground with bulldozers. And that afternoon they had bulletins up laying everybody off, and they had a lot of carmen working there. They had probably 600 carmen working there, and they had bulletins after bulletins. I finally found my name. I was laid off. But that night the coal train started coming in again, and so they got on the WACL radio. Everybody come back to work tomorrow. We got coal coming. We got coal coming. So we didn't lose a day, but we almost did. The railroad almost shut down in 1948 because of no coal. And that was a little known fact that it wasn't publicized much. It was a very, very little known fact that we almost had to shut down because of no fuel. And fuel, that's the highest expense for the railroad. Everything else is cheaper. Labor's cheaper than fuel. The locomotives are cheaper than fuel. Fuel is the highest expense that they have. And you don't think about that. Most of the time you don't think about the fuel being the highest expense, but that's what costs the railroads the most money, is fuel. Even back in steam engine days, the coal.
What about general labor relations with between company and employees with ACL as compared to the Seaboard?
Well, you know, at the ACL, we had a fairly good labor relations. And at the Seaboard, a lot of times you'd have to file a grievance to get something done. But at the coastline, if something come up, generally the general chairman or the local chairman could take care of it. And he would handle it, and then it would all be done. But so a lot of times at the Seaboard, when you had a problem, you'd have to file a grievance to get anything done. And so that was kind of a little bit of difference right there. But I don't know why it was like that, but in one way, one railroad was more congenial, and another way, another railroad was more congenial with the employees I'm talking about. And I actually believe that probably Seaboard Airline was more congenial overall than the coastline was. But both companies had the pluses and minuses, you know.
Okay.
I worked for both companies, so I saw both pluses and minuses on both sides.
Well, I remember my dad always said that, of course, he never worked for the coastline, but
Yeah.
you know, he always said that the Seaboard was really more like a family.
Yeah, it is. It was, yeah.
In your opinion, I mean, you did work on steam engines with Coastline, right?
Yeah, for like
Okay.
5 years, yeah.
So in your opinion, what were the best and the worst steam locomotives that the ACL had?
The worst steam locomotive they had was the decapods. They gave a lot of trouble.
What kind of trouble?
Well, there was, you know, this decapods had that we had on the coastline, that was numbered 2,000 and up. They had a front pair of driver wheels floated. They could float for 2 inches. The lateral was 2 inches, whereas the rest of the drivers had 3/16 of an inch when new. So with that floating, they had to have a ball joint in the front connecting rod, had to have a ball joint in there. And so we had to make an attachment to be able to machine those ball joints. Well, those ball joints give a lot of trouble because, you know, 2 inches this way and that way,
It's a lot.
going around curves, and they eat up them bushings. So they did give a lot of trouble. And then again, one time I heard of one going around a curve that had some kind of a rocker, heart-shaped rocker, that the rear trailer wheels, the weight was on that heart-shaped rocker. And I heard of one up in Alabama that went around a curve too fast and slung that rocker right out of there onto a loading platform. And that thing weighed 300 pounds. So, you know, that was kind of a problem with those locomotives. But then we had a decapod, a Russian locomotive that worked here in Port Tampa. And that thing was a piece of junk. I mean, when it come into the shop, we can hardly ever get it back out of the shop because it would wore out. But it worked. It served down there in Port Tampa, pushing them phosphate cars around and up, you know, into the unloader. They were loaded the phosphate into the ships. Yeah. So that locomotive was a problem. But overall, I think the Pacific locomotives was the best ones that they had. They give the less trouble.
1500 series?
Yeah, the 1500s, the 1600s. They give the less trouble than any of them. They just run and run and run and run. Of course, they had to have their daily maintenance and their daily inspections. That was a drawback with steam locomotives, was they couldn't go very far without having to be lubricated. You know, 200 miles, they had to swap locomotives. Like from Tampa to Jacksonville, they had to put another locomotive on the train. So like every 200 miles, they had to, because the locomotive would run out of lubricant. And then had to go to the roundhouse to be lubricated. So that was a big drawback with the steam locomotives. Now, toward the last end of the steam era, the last locomotive we turned out in the Tampa shop, we had mechanical lubricators on them. And they could go for a long ways. As long as we kept oil in those mechanical lubricators. And they had oil lines that went to different places on the locomotive. And you could adjust the amount of oil going to each place on that mechanical lubricator. And it worked off of the connector rods on the side of the locomotive. The connector rods, you know, going around, it worked this lever back and forth and had a ratcheting device. and it ratcheted around, and that was the pumps that pumped the oil to the different places. And so they did a lot of different upgrading, and actually had in the crown brasses on the mains, we cut a groove right in the crown of it for the lubricator to lubricate that instead of having to have the grease cake coming up. And so they were getting with it, but then the steam engine era ended, and if they had stayed with it a little while longer, you know, no telling what would have happened. Okay. Yeah. Of course, you know, the railroads experimented with steam turbines, and that was a fizzle. That fizzled out. And they experimented with a lot of different types of things that didn't work. But overall, I think the P5s and the Pacifics, I think they was probably the best steam locomotives they had. Now the R1s, the 1800s, they was fantastic locomotives. I like working on them, but they had a problem with the counterbalancing. And when they first got them, they figured out the counterbalance, and they figured something was not right. And I heard that the first run they messed up 300 miles of track. And so I was told, I was told by the machinist I was working with at the time, and I was apprentice at the time. He said they mounted a movie camera on the side. You know, that was back in the days when you hardly ever heard of a movie camera. And they said at 72 miles an hour, the main driver wheels was bouncing off the rails, and that was what was messing up the rail. So they restricted them, the ICC restricted them to 65 miles an hour, and they bought those locomotives for high-speed passenger service. So they worked on those locomotives and rebalanced them all, and luckily, I happened to be on the last locomotive that they rebalanced in 1948. I helped rebalance the last R1 locomotive, and it was a job. It took us like what we mainly rebalanced was the main driver wheels. The rest of the wheels, you know, just they didn't have that much counterweight, but the main driver wheel did. And it took us like a week. We had to melt all the babbitt out, and we had to weld tubings in there, and we had to pour babbitt back in around the tubings. And then we had to have plugs that we put the wheels on parallel bars, precision parallel bars, and we put weights on each crank pin. And we had to weigh the weights and add the weights and got the right amount of weights on there. And they had to balance. And we had to keep driving plugs in those holes where we welded those tubes in with a sledgehammer until they balanced. We used a surface gauge, and when they balanced, that was it. And so after that, those locomotives could run. They had been clocked at 110 miles an hour. And the speed armor only went to 110 miles an hour. So at 110 miles an hour, the speed armor was pegged out. And that was the only locomotive I ever saw that had a speed armor on them, the R1s. None of the other locomotives I ever saw had a speed armor.
Steam locomotives, you mean?
Well, what they had on them was called a valve pilot. They had two needles on it. The needle was one needle was for speed, the speed you were traveling. The other needle was where to set the valve. And when you kept the two needles together by adjusting the valve motion, you got the most efficiency out of the locomotive. And they did put some things they call valve pilots on other locomotives, but there was nothing but a little device that had a plug. The pressure would push it out or in, and I don't know exactly how it worked, but when it was in, I think they was getting the best performance. So, but this one here had the speedometer run off of the wheel, and it had a chain drive just like the diesel locomotives had. And then the valve pilot just worked off the linkage for the valve. And that needle worked off of wherever you put the valve lever. So as long as you kept those two needles together, you was getting the best performance. So that was kind of interesting. Of course, I never got to operate on the locomotive, never got to run them. But I worked on them. I put them together, I helped put them together, you know. And that was interesting. I like that working on steam because they're so interesting, you know. Yeah.
Do you know what the last classes of steam engines that operated out of Waycross and about when?
The last class of steam locomotives?
Yeah.
Well, like I told you earlier, was the 10 small locomotives they kept up. They run from Waycross to Brunswick because of trussels. And they was just small locomotives. I don't know what class it was, but they was like like 2, 6, 2, something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
they were small locomotives. All they did was run little trains, little freight trains over there and back, and it was only 9 miles.
Is that all that is? 9 miles?
9 miles, I think it
Really?
was, from way
Wow.
across to
To Brunswick.
Brunswick.
I
No,
guess-
not to Brunswick, to Blackshear. Yeah, it was
Oh,
about
yeah,
40,
Blackshear.
40 miles. That's right, about 40 miles to Brunswick, something
Yeah,
like that. Yeah,
okay.
I got that wrong. It was about 40 miles.
All right, so according to my info, there were several former Atlanta, Birmingham, and Coast steam locomotives that operated on the ex-A, B, and C branches to Thomasville and Brunswick, and were supposedly the last steam locomotives on the entire ACL system. Did these ever come into Waycross for maintenance, or was that always done at Fitzgerald? And did you ever work on them?
I never worked on any of the ABNC road engines that I know of.
Okay.
Now they may have been repainted and had ACL on them. I'm not sure, but I never, as far as I know, I never worked on any of them.
Okay.
And actually, during that period of time, I was working in a machine shop, so I really wasn't in the roundhouse. I was making parts in a machine shop for steam locomotives.
Okay.
And that was back in I worked there in Waycross in 1948 for 3 months. And that's when I worked in the machine shop.
Okay. Now, a lot of steam locomotives were outfitted with what they call water tenders. What was a water tender? Was that like a tank car that ran behind the?
Yeah, that was additional water tank.
Okay.
Yeah, because then, you know, they use a lot. I remember Seaboard airline had locomotives with additional water tank on the back of them. I didn't see the coastline with them so much, but the Seaboard had them because I think it was, the coastline had their water tank closer than the Seaboard
The
did.
water towers, you mean?
The water tanks, yeah, you know where they got water, yeah.
Okay. So
So-
those water tenders, as they call them here, they were like basically just for the steam engines.
Just
then.
like, well, it's just like a,
They didn't use them on diesels for any reason.
no, I think if I remember right, on the Seaboard airline, I wasn't working for them at the time, but I seen them going in and out of Tampa. They'd have like a tank car behind the tender, and that had the water. It could, you know, transfer to the tender.
Okay.
And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm talking about too. Okay.
So they could go further without having to stop to take on water.
Yeah.
And your water was that was the main thing that, you know, held on steam engines back, was having to stop so often to take on water, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the last question I have here, you already sort of talked about it. That was the counterbalancing of the R1s. But when you came to work for the coastline, were any of the R1s still painted in the what they call the Russian iron or the gray colors, or were they
No.
all black?
None of them was painted with that color. They was all painted with black,
Okay.
coastline black.
Okay.
Because I went to work there in 1947, and you know the locomotives was like,
That was kind of
9 years old. They
towards
were
the
like
end
9
of the
years
steam
old.
era anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the painters, you know, the old paint shop out there, they just had like barrels of paint. They didn't buy paint by the gallon. They bought it by the drum.
Yeah.
And they bought either. I think they may have bought some of it in 5-gallon cans, but mostly I seen just drums of paint out there at the paint shop. And you know, they take quite a few gallons to paint a locomotive. And then what I liked about the coastline though was they always took their wheels, the tires, they paint them white.
Yeah.
And when you let a locomotive go out of the back shop, a fresh overhaul, they had the side rods and the main rods all polished, and they painted them with valve oil so they wouldn't rust. When they polished them with we had a machine that they polished them with. Had a machinist helper that polished them. Every rod that went out of there was polished to a bright shine. And it'd take him a while. It'd take him, he might do 2 or 3 rods, might 2 rods a day. He had a cable that come from the ceiling up about 40 feet up, and it had a thing like a bicycle handlebars, and the shaft went out with a motor on one end and the wheel on the other end with all the grit on it, and had to replace that every so often. And he polished them things till they shined. And then when the locomotive went out, it was sharp because it had the white wheels, the white tires, and it had the valve all on the connector rods and the side rods. Of course, that didn't last long, but and another thing they used to do, you couldn't put paint on a smoke box because the smoke box is so hot, the paint would just cook off of it. Yeah. Where the exhaust steam goes up and goes out the stack, so hot there the paint would just blister off. So they put graphite and oil on there, and the oil would cook off and the graphite would stick.
And that's what made them look great.
And man, them things glittered in the sunlight. They look like diamonds glittering in the sunlight when it's all done fresh, After a while they got grungy, but when they come out of the back shop, they look sharp. I like the looks of them when they first come out of the back shop, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions I had specifically, but we got plenty of time if you just want to tell stories. I know you got a million stories. I've heard some of them, so.
Well, yeah, I got a lot of stories, but it's just experiences, over the years I worked there. And a lot of different experiences, things that happened and anecdote things, and some things was fun and some things wasn't so fun. Some things was kind of serious. But yeah, I got hundreds and hundreds of stories. But yeah,
well,
that's what I like about railroading. It was always different. It wasn't the same thing every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I don't know if it's the same way with the fellas out that's operating the locomotives or not, but I'm quite sure it is. Probably. That they enjoy the different. They might run the same route every day, but every day it's different.
Yeah. One story that I heard you tell that I would like to have on video is the one about the guy that fell into the tank car.
Oh yeah, well, there was a fella. He was a helper for the pipe fitter, and they had a gasoline tank car, aviation gasoline, out by the side of the shop. And for some reason,
this was Gary's shop, right?
At the Gary shops, just Seaboard Airline Gary shops, yeah. And somehow or another, they went out there. They're supposed to work on the fitting at the bottom of the tank car. Something had gone wrong with it, and the pipe fitter set the helper up to open the valve or close the valve up. He had to open the top of the car up, the dome part. And he got overcome with the fumes that fell inside the tank car. And so the pipe fitter come running into the shop, and I was working on the drop table. We were dropping a traction motor. Mr. Black and I was working on the drop pit, and he come running in there and hollering and screaming and incoherent, talking in the Spanish language we didn't understand, and he was pointing. So I went and looked to see what he was pointing at. He was pointing at the tank car. So I ran out there, and John Black, your dad, he ran out there with me, and I climbed up on top of the tank car, and he was pointing. I looked down in there, and there was a fellow laying in the gasoline, about 5 inches of gasoline. So your dad, John, he said, I'm going to go and get some rope. And so I'm going to go call in emergency services. I went to the roundhouse office. As quick as I could, I ran. And I couldn't find the phone number. They didn't have 911 numbers back then. I finally had to look it up. It took about a few seconds or a few minutes to find it. I called emergency services. I don't know why they didn't have it posted, but they didn't. And told them what I said. We got a man in the tank car. We need some help. And I run back out there. When I got back out there, your dad was already back out there with the rope and a carman apprentice. I got to back up on that. The fellow I used to work with, he was my apprentice at the Atlantic Coastline. He had hired on at Seaboard, and his name was Frank. And Frank had gone down in the tank car thinking he was going to pick the guy up and bring him out. Well, when I got back out and I looked down in the tank car, I seen Frank coming up the ladder, and just as he got to the top of the ladder, he started falling backwards. And somehow or another, I don't know how I did it, but I reached down and grabbed him on his armpits, and I flipped him out on top of the tank car. He'd run out of air. What made him think he could go down in that tank car with no oxygen? I don't know what made him think that, but he thought that. So anyway, a carman apprentice went down in the tank car and put the rope around the guy. And we all tugged on the rope and pulled him up out of there. And we got him out and got him on top of the tank car, and then we laid him down on the ground. And he was in convulsions. He wasn't breathing. He was in convulsions. So I rolled him over on his chest and on his stomach, and I started giving him artificial respiration. And about that time, the emergency service come up, and they took over. I'd be giving him artificial respiration probably 2 or 3 minutes. He still wasn't breathing. So they got him, they put some kind of a thing on his face with an oxygen bottle, and they took him to the hospital. And took Frank and they took the carpenter apprentice, because they were both having difficulty breathing. They took those 3 to the hospital. And Frank told me when he got back to the shop, he said that when they got the fellow in the emergency room, the gasoline fumes was everywhere. And they looked down, the fireman looked down and saw a torch lighter hanging on his belt loop. And he said he carefully unhooked that torch lighter and carried it and threw it out the door. And I thought about that many times, because one time at the railroad shop, they had a gasoline tank car that was going to steam it out. They was going to steam that tank car out so they could work on it, grind the valve in there or whatever. And the pipe fitter went out there and put the steam hose in it, and he tied a brake shoe on the bottom end of the steam hose, and he dropped it down in there. And when he dropped it down in there, and he went and turned the steam valve on, the brake shoe slid across the bottom, made a spark, and the tank car blew to pieces. It blew all the rivets out of it, not all of them, but most. It's just separated. The tank car blew where the drain pipe was to go down the bottom. It blew a hole 4 foot deep in the ground. That tank car was scrapped. So I thought about that so many times since then. If that torch lighter would have made a spark when we was hoisting him out, when he pulled it out of that rope, ain't no telling what would have happened to us. But you know, that's all in the background. That's all gone. You can't do nothing about what's already happened. You can only do what's going to happen in the future. You can't do anything about what's already happened. So that, thankfully, we got him out alive. He come back to work in about 2 weeks. They treated him at the hospital. They got him breathing, got his lungs cleared out. He hadn't been breathing air for probably 10 minutes.
Wow.
He probably, this gasoline fumes was all he was breathing. I don't know how he survived it. I really don't know how he survived, but he did. Wow. Amazingly, he survived it.
Wow.
And I guess they treated his lungs at the hospital for, about 2 weeks later, he come back to work. The fellow's name was B-R-I-T-T, Britt. And anyway, as soon as we got him on, as soon as the emergency rescue car left, I can't remember who it was. One of the foremen said, "Yeah, everybody get back to work." But we had a crowd out there by then, you know. Said, "It's okay, everybody can go back to work now." So everybody went back to their job. All this happened within 30 minutes. Within 30 minutes, all this happened. And, you know, it wasn't click, click, click. Yeah.
So any other stories you want to share, or
well, that was
incidents, or
that was one time. But you know, there's a lot of. I got thousands of stories, but
I know we could spend hours here.
Yeah, we could spend all day here, me telling you stories about what happened at the railroad. But
yeah.
I got thousands of them, because every day was a different story, you know. And dealings I had with different people, and dealings I had with supervisors, dealings I had with, you know, just overall railroad work. Everybody has that. When they work for the railroad, it's like that. You know, everybody has those kind of.
I think that's probably true
things going
anywhere,
on.
Not just for the railroad, but anywhere. But,
well, you know, I worked for other companies, and before I went to work at the railroad, and to me, it wasn't nearly as exciting as railroad work. Like I said, I worked for the dredge boat company. That was drudgery every day, same old thing, shoveling sand, you know. Maybe little things, but the same thing every day. But I worked at a shipyard. I was a ship fitter helper for about 4.5 months, and same thing every day, just about, you know. Putting stuff in there, getting it in place, and tack welding it, and then going to another part. Same old thing, same old, but in the railroad is different things every day. Okay. Like I know when I go to work, I had no idea what was going to happen that day. When I punched in, no telling what was going to happen that day. I think I posted a thing yesterday where I went to a wreck. I got to work that morning, had no idea I was going to go to a wreck that day. First thing, boss said, "Go with the carpenter foreman. You got to go to a wreck." A locomotive hit a string of rail cars. It's tore them all to pieces. Tore the locomotive all to pieces. Luckily, as far as I know, nobody got hurt. But that locomotive was destroyed.
Yeah, I saw your pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that ends the session. I want to thank you for spending some time and telling us all about your career with the railroad, and hopefully maybe we'll get an article in Line South magazine.
I think I told you wrong a while ago when I said I have 42 years. I didn't have 42 years of service. I had 36 years and 4 months.
But that was over 42 years.
Over 42 years period of time,
Yeah, okay.
From the time I was 18 until the time I was 62, I retired at age 62 with an early retirement.
Yeah.
And back then you could retire with an early retirement with a 15% reduction in your pension, which I was glad to do that because I had 3 years to spend with my wife I would not have had otherwise. We traveled all over the United States.
Yeah.
During those 3 years, we had a lot of good times, traveling.
Yeah.
And she was a homebody, but after I get her away from home for about 4 or 5 days, she's good to go then. The first 4 or 5 days was kind of rough.
Really?
But after 4 or 5 days, she was good to go.
Yeah.
She enjoyed the trips, but first 4 or 5 days she wanted to be. She was a homebody. She liked to be home. Yeah. So I was glad I did take those extra 3 years.
Yeah, I bet you are.
And I read somewhere that it takes you 14 and a half years before you lose anything. It works out,
Lose anything as far as
you got 15% reduction.
Oh,
okay. In the 14 and a half years of that reduction, you make it up. If you live past that 14 and a half years, which I have, you make it back up. So I'm still drawing money from the railroad retirement that, if of course I hadn't lived, I wouldn't be drawing it. And at the time I retired, the railroad retirement person at the railroad retirement board said most railroaders live, the average life is 2 to 2.5 years after retirement.
Wow.
So I've been blessed. I've really been blessed.
Yeah, so let's see. So how long have you been retired now?
29 years.
Okay, so that's probably even longer than my dad, because my dad had a pretty good retirement too.
Yeah, 29 years I've been retired.
My dad retired in I want to say 81 or 82, and he died in 2005. So.
Railroad retirement is different from Social Security because it's an annuity. You pay into an annuity, and when you retire, you start drawing out of that, and it's a whole lot. If the Social Security is set up like railroad retirement, it'd be probably better. But railroad retirement came before Social Security, and the Social Security planners, they planned it after railroad retirement. But railroad retirement, we're paying $6 out of every 100 into our retirement fund,
6%.
where on Social Security at the same time I was paying $6, the other people on Social Security are paying 50 cents.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I draw more than I would if I drawed on Social Security.
Oh heck yeah.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Yeah.
Quite a bit more.
Yeah.
And I draw the Social Security equivalent, and then I draw the railroad retirement on top of that.
Oh, so
they call it Tier 1 and Tier 2.
Oh, and but both those come out of railroad retirement though?
Both come out of railroad retirement, yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't realize this, but up until last year, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was told by my tax man that the money I had paid into my railroad retirement fund had paid for my annuity, and I had just started drawing out of the general fund. So I'm still the money I paid, the interest on the money I paid in is still paying into my annuity.
Oh.
So that's the whole difference in railroad retirement and Social Security.
Okay.
The interest pays back, into it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's good.
Interesting.
I like the way it works.
Okay.
I just wish one thing. I wish the people that did the railroad retirement had not turned it over to the government to administer it. That would have been the best thing.
I heard my dad say that many, many, many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they administer something, they're going to have their hand in it.
You bet.
Yeah.
All right.